Today I'm working on the wrap dress that came in January's threadcrate box. Basically, I'm just going to be making the dress and have you guys follow along. Since this is a PDF pattern, in order to cut it out, I first needed to print it and tape it together. And out of respect for the designer, I'm just going to go ahead and blur the pattern pieces. In the world of PDF patterns, there's often two different kind of patterns that you can get. There are trim patterns and no trim patterns. Normally I wouldn't bother with a trim pattern because they're a little bit of a pain in comparison to the no trims. But I learned a really cool trick from a Facebook group recently, and the trick is that you can hole punch along the lines of the trim patterns. Then they become no trim patterns because you can just look through the holes and find the lines and line them up. After getting my pattern ready to use, I went ahead and ironed all of my fabric so that I wouldn't have funny lines while I was trying to cut it out. Yes, I took the time to iron the full 3 yards of fabric. I know, it's a lot. Then after taking the time to iron all that fabric, I had to take a break to go get Sleeping Beauty from her nap.
Hey, cutie. Did you have a nice nap? Did you have a nice nap, huh? Yeah. You ready to come work with me? Ready to come work with Mama? Huh? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, let's go.
After getting the baby all situated and set up next to me, I laid out my fabric and got it ready for cutting. Usually I like to use my rotary blade and mat for this, but some of the pattern pieces were just a bit too big, so I just used it where I could and then used scissors for the rest. Once again, I'm blurring out the pattern pieces out of respect for the designer. The first thing that I decided to sew would be the waist ties because I needed to add those later, but they needed to be constructed in order to add them. So I figured it would be a good starting point. In order to make this, I had to sew them with right sides together, then turn them out. The pattern states that I could use bodkin to turn these. However, I tried and I tried and I tried to figure it out and I just could not get there. So I resorted to my trusty little loop turner. And honestly, I have no idea how I got by turning things without this crazy little tool. After making the waist ties, I ironed them flat so that they would lay nice and crisp while I was sewing them, and so they would have a nice clean look to them. Now that those are made, it's time for the assembly of the bodice. In order to do this, I needed to match the shoulder seams and the side seams and sew them together. This kind of fabric is often very tricky to sew with. It's pretty slippery, so I like to take a little bit of extra time pinning these things in place. Now it's time to take it to the sewing machine and sew the seams. And now that they're sewn, of course, Sleeping Beauty woke from another nap, so I went to go get her once more.
Did you have a nice nap? Yeah? Oh, good. Yeah.
Now back to the sewing table. I had to repeat the steps to make the bodice so that I could make a lining as well. Now what you're seeing me do is put the lining and the main bodice together so that my seams are enclosed and they are one piece. Now the pattern doesn't say to do this part, but I could not imagine doing it any other way. They wanted me to top stitch along the bodice front, but they did not say to iron it. And there was no way that I was going to top stitch it without ironing it down first. So I ironed and then I top stitched. Next it's time to add the sleeves. I had to sew the sides of the sleeves together first, and then I took them to the bodice, pinned them inside with right sides together, and then took them to the machine to attach them. So at this point, the bodice is almost completely done. I have everything attached. The only thing is that the sleeves need to be hemmed. But it's a little bit late at night, so I am just going to call it for today, and I will finish this tomorrow. But I'm pretty pleased with the progress and how things are coming along. If you'll notice, it's starting to shape up and it has a wrap top now. So I'm excited how this is coming along. Anyways, good night. Then, after a restful night of sleep, I woke to remember that we were having a birthday party for my son that day, with cousins, and I hadn't gotten any wrapping paper to wrap it as a gift. So, what does Mama do? Mama goes to Walmart and buys fabric instead of wrapping paper. Why, you ask? Well, because clearly I had to make him a bag to put his present in instead of wrapping it like a normal person. Now, you might ask the questions, could I have just gotten wrapping paper? Yes. Would it have saved me a lot of time and energy? Absolutely. But would it have been nearly as fun? Definitely not. My kid loves outer space and planets, so I thought this fabric was pretty perfect, and probably better than any wrapping paper that I would have been able to find anyways. To decide what to make, I perused YouTube for a quick minute and found an awesome tutorial for a drawstring backpack. This tutorial came from Made Every Day by Dana. She's pretty awesome, by the way. You should go check her out. After I saw her tutorial, I knew that was the exact thing that I wanted to make to put my kid's present in. Honestly, it was a super quick and easy backpack to make, and it probably took me all of an hour, maybe an hour and a half to put it together. And check it out! Doesn't it look so good? Then I slid his present in the bag, cinched it up, and patted myself on the back. Then after making the bag, I realized I still had a few minutes before the party, so I decided to grab my bobbin saver and go ahead and organize my bobbins. Do you see how gross my box of messy threads is? That's embarrassing. I'm so glad I fixed that. And the cool part about this bobbin saver too is if I flip it upside down, the bobbins stay in place. They do not fall out. Then it was time for the party.
Hey, what about Mama? What about the surprise Mama gave me?
It's coming.
Do you want to see it?
I do.
Okay.
Did you wash her upstairs? Sorry.
It's fine.
Please take a moment to appreciate this expression of pure joy. Okay, you gotta open it up. It's a bag holding something.
What's inside the bag?
Thank you.
She needed just today.
Yeah, I made it. Then, after all that excitement and another night of sleep, I got right back to work on the dress. In order to finish the bodice, I still needed to hem the sleeves, so that's where I started with so I could be completely done with the bodice. After the sleeves were hemmed, I was able to work on the skirt. The skirt has a back center seam, so I sewed that first. Then after sewing the back seam, I got to attach the side panels, which swoop around gracefully to the front. While adding the side panels, I also had to add the waist ties during this part. After the side panels were attached, I could attach the bodice to the skirt. 2 more waist ties were attached during this process, and let me tell you, it definitely took a little while to put it together. Now the funny thing about sewing is that you can almost always be sure that you've done everything right, but then you finish sewing a seam and you realize that you did it completely wrong. Yes, that did just happen to me. I sewed one of the waist ties in the wrong spot, and it got sewn inside when it was supposed to be sewn on the outside. So I got to get my little frenemy named the seam ripper, and I ripped out the stitches right there so that I could sew it back in the right way. Yes, you could say that the seam ripper and I have quite the love-hate relationship. After I fixed the waist tie, I had the bodice attached to the skirt. Then the last thing I had to do was hem it. Since this dress has a curved hem, that is a little bit more complicated. But thank goodness I have hem tape on hand. And let me tell you, I will never, ever, 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 ever make a dress that has a curved hem without hem tape. Seriously, I think that hemming is the worst part of sewing. It is so boring and monotonous. Yet it has to be done, so I still did it. And now it's time for the grand reveal. This dress is just perfect for frolicking through my yard, holding a baby, playing with said baby, and also teaching an archery lesson or two. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.